Welcome to the show No Instructions, where we meet with founders and interview them about starting and growing their businesses. I'm your host, Chad Ingram, three-time founder and CEO at Distro. Distro is a platform to help businesses build teams by breaking down borders around the world. Let's go ahead and get started with today's guest and see how they built their business. Welcome to the episode of No Instructions. Today we have Daniel Sellers from Lumio.
Hi, y'all. Glad to be here.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, when I was watching some podcasts in preparation for this, you've had like an intimidating lineup of people over time. So it's nice to be here, feel a little bit small sitting in this chair right now.
No, it's great. It's great. I got to meet Daniel at a dinner, like an investor dinner, I don't know, like a month ago or so, or a few weeks.
Yeah, I think that's about right.
A few weeks ago, yeah. And we happened to sit at the same table and we started talking cars. And so, you know, I love cars, so.
It happens, right?
Yeah.
You make those connections whenever like somebody likes cars. It's pretty easy to start talking about cars.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Well, just so everyone has just a little bit of context, tell us a little bit about, you know, your role today at Lumio and what Lumio is, just real briefly, and then we'll kind of dive into a little bit more about you.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm the SVP of Product and Technology at Lumio. I run our product and design and UX groups. Product design, engineering, UX, all of those things. And we're building technology for the solar industry. We're a solar sales company and a solar install company. So we do the whole life cycle of the solar deal with a homeowner. And we build a lot of tooling to support both sales and ops and the homeowners that we build systems for.
That's awesome. Is your background more in programming or product?
Yeah, so my background is much more heavily in programming. I've been writing software for almost my entire career. So I have a really good product team that I work with, and they keep me in line on product things. But I love research, always have. And so I dive into the product side a bit on research.
Where do you feel like you're inherently gifted, would you say? What comes easier to you, product or engineering?
That's a good question. Like, I really see them overlapping a ton.
Yeah.
Because the things that led me into engineering and the things that have like aided me as I've helped guide the product team are kind of the same things. Like, I love data. I love researching. You know, my school background is in history. So I come from like a soft sciences side of things. So taking a human approach to problems is really something that comes naturally to me. And so all of those kind of come together. Like, I use them on the engineering side. I use them on the product side.
Right.
And yeah, like product, you end up talking a lot more about like strategy and learning the market and understanding the market than you do as an engineer. But it's sort of, they're really similar skill sets when it comes down to it.
Yeah, very cool. So let's talk about you. Where are you from originally?
I'm from Texas originally.
Okay, what part?
Austin.
Austin.
The best part.
Austin's pretty awesome. Dallas is cool too, but isn't it hotter in Dallas?
So Dallas is like more humid than Austin.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, it is.
Really?
Austin is semi-arid. It's like it's not Utah arid, but it's drier.
I've had like excellent food in both places, but I would say, I don't know, more barbecue in Dallas, but Austin, Texas is still one of the best dinners I've ever had. Yeah. And it was so good. That place, like, every time I go there, I feel like I eat really well every time I go to Texas.
Okay, next time you go to Austin, we'll give you some like barbecue places to go to and some food recommendations because there's good food there.
And last time I went, I also bought a pair of cowboy boots and wore them home.
Yeah, good. You should.
The full Texas experience.
Yeah, you got to have the whole thing.
For sure. This is a total tangent. We'll get more into you in a second, but I did with my wife one time. We did that random thing where you go and you're like, all right, let's book the next flight to somewhere cool, and it was Dallas, Texas, and we went to like the stockyards or whatever, and did the full rodeo experience. And Texas is wild. I like. Texas. It's cool.
Yeah. So I went to school in Houston.
Okay.
And lived in Houston for about 7 years, and the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo. If you want to go to like a huge livestock show and rodeo, it's wild.
That's cool. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Like they do stadium arena concerts every night.
Right.
So like back when I lived there. Taylor Swift, who was then like very, very small, just sort of breaking into things, was doing like whole arena concerts at the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo.
I'm sure those tickets were a lot cheaper.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so you grew up in Austin. And how many siblings did you grow up with?
So I have...
You're good.
I have 4 siblings.
Okay, cool.
5 siblings.
Yeah, five siblings. And where do you fall in?
I'm the oldest.
Yeah. And where does your story start? Like where like when people want to get to know you a little bit better, like really, where does it start for you?
That's a good question. So I grew up all over the place, which is kind of part of that story. My dad was an electrical engineer, and we kind of moved with the semiconductor industry. So I lived in Colorado, outside of Fort Collins, lived in Western New York for a while, Florida for a while, wound up back in Texas around the time I was a teenager. And all of that like has had impact on who I am. It also means that I switch accents a lot. So like my wife can tell when Texas family are on the line, and when my grandmother from Alabama calls, like I drop into a Southern drawl. But you know, I've been a lot of different places, and as a result have had to like grow and adapt to different friend groups over time. And it also like has made me not really worried about moving places. So like when I moved to Utah, I was in the midst of going through a divorce.
Got it.
And moved to Utah with like no family, no friends, moved into like a little tiny apartment in West Jordan and lived there like by myself for like 7 months.
Gosh, that must have been hard.
It wasn't.
So like, are you saying that the changes that you had so many times when you were younger and moving around a lot, maybe it made that a little easier? Yeah,
like it's made me like adaptable to circumstances and places, right?
Sure.
So I've had a lot of opportunities to make new friends and like build strong friendships. But I've also lived a lot of places and, you know, worked on a lot of different things and gotten to know a lot of different things that I love doing. And because of that, like it's made it easy for me to relate to people. So like to go back to your question, it kind of depends on the person and the things they're interested in, because chances are that I've either lived somewhere that they've lived or been interested in living, or I have at some point in my life been fascinated by something that they are also fascinated by.
That's cool. Makes you more relatable as well.
Yeah, it's fun because then you get to talk about like, what is it that a person's passionate about? What is it they're excited about? And I get to share my excitement for it because I've been excited by a lot of things over time.
Right, right. Do you feel like you're or how would you categorize yourself, as more of a social person or a less social person?
Well, I'm an introvert for sure. Like people wear me out, but I love people. So like my wife, Katie, she's an extrovert, solidly extrovert. She gets energy from people being in our house and being around people. She hates planning to have people come over. I like planning to have people come over. I think it's part of like having been raised in the South by Southerners. Is like you feed people. Like that's what you do. And so like I plan the things. She gathers the energy from having the people there. It wears me out by the end, and by the end she's like floating. Yeah,
after a couple hours, you're like, all right, I think I'm ready to go be alone for a minute.
That's right. I'm going to go like sit in a corner for a little while. So like it's, I'm definitely an introvert, but I love people. And so a lot of people think I'm extroverted. But it does, like people do over time kind of like wear me down and I have to go recharge.
That's kind of funny. I think people would be really surprised for me to say something similar because they would think I'm very social, but like I actually spend a lot of time alone, which is good. I don't know. It's good. I don't know, for I guess the right personality, it's good.
I think that's something that people tend to think about leaders and people who are, you know, trying things and experimenting, building companies. They often think that they are naturally extroverted. But often, like I've known a lot of leaders over time who are like very introverted, who can put on the extroverted for a little while and then like need to go recharge after an all hands or recharge after some heavy one-on-ones. I definitely fall in that category.
Definitely. Definitely. So, with your childhood, like, I don't know, were you close with your parents? Did you feel like, were you closer with your mom or dad?
Sure. Yeah. So I was homeschooled too. So like moving around a lot, painting a good picture here. Yeah. Moving around a lot, homeschooled. So my mom has a degree in education, dad's an engineer. And so, not all of my siblings were homeschooled, but I was. And so I wound up like very close with my parents because they were my teachers, as well as my parents. So I like saw and interacted with them a lot. Yeah. And yeah, like definitely closer. I think closer with my mom over time. She and I definitely have the deep conversations where dad and I, before he passed away, like we talked cars and motorcycles and MotoGP because awesome. Those are the things that we were both interested in and could have a conversation about. Yeah,
that's cool. So you said he's working on semiconductors? Yeah. Yeah. So what influence did that have on you in, the career eventually that you would choose in programming? Like, did that impact you very much? Did he talk to you very much about work or anything?
Yeah, so I was growing up as a teenager in Austin in, the late 90s, early 2000s. So right as that first .com bubble was going. And
and there were tech companies in Texas for sure.
Yeah, Austin's like almost as old tech as Silicon Valley is old tech. Yeah. And so everything in Austin was going crazy. I think, I'd started building web pages for fun because the internet was this new thing. And like, I got on and started doing, view source and learning how to create web pages. That's cool. And I think luckily I didn't realize how marketable that skill would have been at that moment in Austin because I very well could have like gone out at 15, 16 and found a job working for a startup and probably would have wound up a different person than I did. Yeah. But as I was starting to do school...
high school or university?
So I started going to community college at roughly the same time that my friends were going into high school. And my dad encouraged me to start looking at computers, not really as my primary career. Like I wanted to go design products. Like I really wanted to be...
Well holding that thought really quick, like going into this computer thing, right? Because even back then, like I remember you and I are not far off in age, I guess. And, and I was a kid, I remember computers that were very, very archaic and, green screens and, very, very simple, arguably pre-internet. But like, was that available to you? Did you have a computer at home, like in those earlier years?
Totally. Yeah. Like I remember the green screens, our first computer was a 286. And, my dad would dial into bulletin boards, to do research for work. And so like we'd sit there and like watch him dial in and have conversations over text on a green screen. So I remember way back pre-internet in a lot of ways. Yeah. And that definitely influenced me, right? So I grew up with a computer in the home. I grew up working, playing on computers, and then got nudged into like, hey, you should probably learn something about computers, maybe learn how to do network administration or something. So you have a skill that you can use to work through college. Right. And that was kind of how I wound up diving into it a little bit more formally than I had because I was doing it just for fun before that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. And so you started building websites, but just for fun at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. I wish that I still had my first website. It was great. It was like classic late 90s internet, tiled stone background and flaming torch GIFs, all that. It was great.
That's awesome.
I've since lost it, but it was very, very like stereotypical early GeoCities kind of thing.
Wait, no, that wouldn't have been on, or maybe it would have been on Wayback Machine at some point.
So that was back when your ISP would provide you with like website hosting. Yeah. So it was like an AT&T website. So it was like AT&T.com/tilde, like the home directory, all that stuff. Like not a real domain, not on GeoCities. Wayback Machine does not have it. I've checked.
Isn't that crazy? Like I remember the internet was like just coming out and companies were just starting to put websites out there, and there wasn't really a search engine. I think there was like some MVP search engines, and you had to like literally key in the website. And so I remember as a kid, like being so fascinated by this thing where I could just like type in the name of something with a .com.
Yep.
And then I might get a result or I might not because they hadn't built it yet and that was kind of wild.
The internet pre-Google was like a whole different place, a whole different experience.
Yeah, it was like very black box.
Yeah. And you had like the web rings that you could like find a topic and then like jump from website to website.
Yeah. And so like I think my first interaction with anything programming, at least in its very basic sense, was when somebody invited me to MySpace. And and then my friend comes over, and I didn't even know this was a thing or how to do it. I mean, I was probably 14 or 15 maybe. And he comes over, he's like, "Oh, I can customize this for you." And he literally goes in and customizes the MySpace page. And I was like, "What did you do? How did you do that?" And then he started to teach me how to do that. And then I think after that you could like change some colors easily and stuff. But this is wild, a lot of these people that were exposed to programming and coding way back then, are doing incredible things with it today. So imagine like children now that are learning it in elementary school in some cases. Yep. I mean, see what'll happen in another 20 years. It's kind of wild.
Yeah. I mean, just the availability of technology and its ubiquity it's going to change where we can get to, because they're starting from so much further ahead than we were.
Yeah, definitely. What did your other siblings end up doing?
So I have one of my sisters is a fashion tech designer. So she designs patterns and materials and does all that selection.
That's cool.
I have a sister who's a marine biologist. I'm working as an academic advisor now. One of my brothers is working in mental health. And then I have a brother who's he studied music, and he's continuing his studies and continuing to explore that. And also in his main job right now is working on farms and helping with sustainability there.
That's cool.
So we're kind of all over the place.
Yeah, you are. It's very
youngest
diverse.
Is still in college. Yeah, still studying. But on the side, like his main job right now is he's making jewelry. So he does jewelry making, which is fascinating.
That is cool. It's weird how like you can come from the same parameters, right? From the same parents, and still there's so many differences that make up each one of us. My kids are pretty young. I have a 5-year-old, 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old, and they're all so different. Mm-hmm. It's kind of wild.
Yeah, it's true.
So, okay. You have some influence. You start building some websites. What do you do next?
So, like, I really wanted to build ships. Like, I wanted to design ships. Like, this was like my dream.
Like ocean-faring ships.
Right.
That's cool.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, as a teenager, had like a subscription to Wooden Boat magazine and like sketched hull shapes and sail patterns, all that stuff. And this, like, I went and toured the office of an industrial designer. So industrial design is the design of physical products. Yeah. And realized that, like, holy cow, this thing that I was thinking was just limited to ships. Like, no, like it can be much more than that. And so that sort of was a pivotal moment for me where I was like, okay, I'm going to go design physical products. And that's what I started college for when I finally like left Austin to go to college. Because I loved it, like, and I still do. Like, I still love making things with my hands and designing things. I think it's probably like 15% at this point, 10-15% of the furniture in our house is stuff that I designed and built.
Really?
Yeah.
Today?
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. That's so cool. Like, I loved that. And so like, I was going to go do that, and had computers as like back of the pocket. If I need something, that'll be my thing. And started going to college for that, and totally burned out. The program was super intense. It was the kind of program where they give you a key to the building on your first day. Wow. And they're like, here you go. This will get you in the building 24/7, 365. Wow. You can't live in the building, but the showers are on the second floor. And like, I and everyone else in that program spent nights sleeping under our desks.
Wow.
But it was great. Like, it was a small, tight-knit group of people. that you got to know really, really well. But it was also like exhausting. It was a ton.
So was it exhausting just because of the pressure and the time spent doing it, or was it because you didn't really enjoy it like you thought you might?
Yeah, no, it was definitely like the pressure and the time spent. Like I had a project that I spent like 110 hours building.
Wow.
Over like 2 weeks.
Wow.
While also like as a full-time student, that was one class of my load. And so there came a point where I was just like, holy cow, like I am exhausted. Like
there's a lot of ways to make money.
Yeah. As much as I love this, like it is, it's wearing on my relationships. It's like burning me out. So I wound up deciding to change my major, changed it like 3 times over a summer.
What'd you settle on?
Yeah. History. Yeah. Which is like a huge departure, right? So I'd wanted to do industrial design. There came a point where I was like, I'm exhausted. I was working full time, building websites for the university at that point. Yeah. So I'd sort of like stepped back in.
Yeah. I mean, well, it just seemed like you were like denying some hard truth right in front of you, you know. It's like, hey, I'm going to keep pursuing this thing over here, but these people keep paying me to do something I'm good at.
And that's what it wound up being, right? Is I was like, well, okay, I'm making money doing this. It's decent money. I learned later that it was like terrible money, and I just didn't know it because I was young and naive.
Yeah.
But like I have this job, it's working, this thing's burning me out. I'm going to change my major. And I decided after a lot of thought, I was like, okay, I'm going to be a history professor. I love research. I love writing. I think that influences the code that I write. But like, I love those things. I'm going to go be a history professor. And so I started down that path, changed my major, started taking history classes, wrote an undergrad thesis on Western Pennsylvania and the cultural influences there that impacted the American Revolution, which like,
cool.
If you ever want to be bored,
yeah,
I can talk your ear off about it.
No, it's cool. I like history, actually. My wife makes fun of me all the time because I'll be like, hey, let's go stop and go see this thing there. And she'll be like, oh, gosh. You know? And I'm like, no, this year, this long ago, this cool thing happened here. Yep. She'll be like, yeah, that's cool. Cool, Chad. I was so fascinated by it.
Yeah, so I was like headed that way because I figured, you know, if I'm going to get into grad school, I need a writing sample. This will be my writing sample. It'll also be like a dress rehearsal for grad school because I had to do an oral defense of it. So like had readers and had a panel that I had to go and then like defend the thing that I'd written to. And right as I was finishing that up, I wrote a letter to a history professor who I respected a lot. I was like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. What are the things I should be doing? Like, how should I be preparing so that I'm a good candidate so that I can do this well in the future? And he wrote me back this letter, and I will forever be grateful to the letter he wrote me. But he wrote back, and like he didn't have to. Like he didn't know me from, you know,
so he was just another professor that wrote
not
textbooks somewhere else, and it was not your professor.
Not even at my university.
Wow.
Like I literally just wrote him out of the blue and was like, hey, we have these things in common. Like we share these beliefs. You've raised a family. Like, tell me your thoughts. And he goes, it's really hard to raise a family on a history professor's salary.
Wow.
If you can do something else and enjoy it, do that thing.
Wow.
Remember, like the whole time, like I'm working writing software and doing graphic design for the university. And so I get this letter and I'm like, oh, okay. Maybe this is another like nudge in the right direction.
Were you married yet?
I was, yeah. So I was married for the first time then.
Okay. Any kids at that point?
No kids. And I had this would have been my last year of school. So I had just started working at NASA. So I had left the university, was making more money with NASA. It's still like terrible money. If you're listening, government and universities do not pay well.
It sounds sexy, but it's not.
Yeah, it's not.
So, okay. So I think we need to tidy up the letter, right? So let's go to the letter. So the letter says, hey, you should seriously consider something else.
Yeah.
Brutally honest. How did it make you feel?
Like it was a mix of things. Like I was sad because I'd now spent 2 years finishing up school in history. I was looking at what grad programs to apply to, like getting ready. I'd spent all this time writing an undergrad thesis. And here was this letter. And I felt like sad because it was very clear that this was like a moment of decision. But also I was really grateful. Because he went into all the details. He was like, look, there are more people applying for history professor roles than there are roles. It's been that way for a long time. It's probably not going to change. It's hard to get a job in this. And that was really like, honestly, like the kindest thing he could have done was to give me a very clear picture of the challenges it was going to face. One of the things he said was, I look at all of my children, none of them are in academia. All of them are doing something else that pays better.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is that like it was hard raising them. Even with him and his wife, they're both history professors.
Interesting.
So it was like this great moment of like frustrated clarity.
Well, it's almost like you were expecting. It's like you wrote him almost maybe with an expectation of what he might tell you. Like almost like he was going to validate what you've been working on.
Yeah.
And he didn't at all.
No. Like I expected him to say like, hey, yes, okay, here are the things that you can do to like prepare yourself. And like, here are some schools you should think about. If this is the area that you're interested in, then like, this is kind of the things you should be considering and thinking about. And he wrote back instead with like, maybe this isn't for you. And like, he hadn't read anything that I'd written. He didn't know me from Adam.
That's funny.
But it was really great. And it sort of freed me, because I went from facing another, 4 to 8 years of college, to, oh, hey, your career is right here in front of you. See where it goes.
What did as you're in this point in your life, was your dad still alive at that point?
Yeah, he was.
What sort of feedback would he have given you, or did he give you?
Yeah. I mean, we definitely talked about it.
Yeah.
And like his feedback was similar. He was like, yeah, this is really good information for you. And you have a place that you can continue to grow and continue to work. You might as well see where it goes.
So how long do you take to make a decision after you get that letter?
Well, again, like I was already working full time, working for NASA.
Yeah, that's true.
And so it was really like
NASA. What were you doing for them? Because that wasn't related to your history degree, right?
No, it was software development.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was doing software development
it's
for
like
them.
somebody's trying to hit you on the head with a book or something, saying, "Wake up."
I'm pretty hard to like convince of things. So yeah, no, like it was pretty easy because it was like, oh, okay. I have this piece of feedback.
Yeah.
Like I didn't even apply for grad school. Like by the time I had finished graduating, finished my defense, I knew that I was going to keep pursuing software development and see where it took me.
Okay. So now that you have that and you kind of putting this history idea behind you a little bit, right? Yeah. Or academia, let's say that, right? Behind you, do you feel more free or more directed on what you should do next? Or like at any point, did you feel like you were divided trying to do these two things really?
For sure. Yeah. Like I knew that I knew that I wasn't going to be able to keep doing both, right? Like as a grad student, I wasn't going to have time to also be working for NASA or working for anywhere else writing software. It was going to have to be like all in on history.
Yeah.
And so there was like, I'd been doing two things at once, and it was really nice to just do one.
Yeah.
Once I graduated, because I was done with school. I was able to just focus on work. And it was wild because all of a sudden I had like free time. I wasn't staying up until like all hours of the night working on homework after getting home from work.
Yeah.
It was great. It was very freeing.
Nice. So what did your wife at the time, what did she think about, these decisions?
Yeah, she was really supportive of it.
That's good.
Her main concern was like, will you be able to make enough money to support a family doing software? and I remember having a conversation with her about it and being like, yeah, well, I think for sure, like as a senior engineer, I should be able to make this amount of money.
Little did she know, 20 years or whatever in the future, 15 years in the future,
Yeah. And so like I laugh thinking about that number now, because I was like, it's like $90,000.
Yeah,
and I was like, oh, I didn't even know what the market was at the time, let alone what it was going to become.
Totally.
And I thought about, I was like, oh, yeah, I'll make like $90,000 someday, and it'll be great. And like, yeah, it was interesting.
So how did you feel being there as a team member at NASA? What was that like?
Yeah, so it was really interesting. NASA is both a really amazing place to work and learn, and a really bureaucratic mess all at the same time.
Help us understand that. That's awesome.
So I was building software for the Office of Education at Johnson Space Center. Yeah. And the servers that we were deploying our code to had...
On-prem, right?
Yeah, they were on-prem, but they were managed by 4 different contracts. So we were one of 4 contracts. So our database was owned by one contract. The physical server up to and the OS were owned by a different contract. The middleware was owned by a 3rd contract, and then there was us writing the software. We were the 4th contract involved.
Wow.
And it was a mix of things. I was, idealistic and young and naive and didn't understand politics, and I definitely burned some bridges there very quickly without knowing what I was doing. And had to learn fairly quickly how to like interact in a larger group, because I was coming from, working inside of one college at a university where our team was like 4 people, 5 people, and we ran our own servers. It was all us.
Yeah.
And went from that to like, oh, if we need a server upgrade, like we have to go talk to like 3 different people on 3 different contracts and get them to work through it.
That's wild.
On the flip side, it was like fascinating, because you'd go have a brown bag lunch where like the leading lunar geologists would talk about the geology of the moon in like a 6-week series, right? Like it was both of those things at the same time.
Incredible experience though, right?
Oh yeah.
Like, working at NASA, it just, some of the brightest people in the world, have gone through there,
Totally.
And how long were you there?
So I was there for like 3.5 years at NASA.
Cool. And what brought you, or before we move on to that, the next thing, like what sort of technologies were you focused on at the time?
Yeah. So I was doing all of it, right?
Yeah.
We were, again, like a small team who was building the actual software. So we were doing the database architecture. We were using Cold Fusion as our software, our server, which was like, now like no one knows what Cold Fusion is, but Cold Fusion was like the birth of the internet and the birth of server-side programming.
That's cool.
And then, designing all the websites, doing typography and all that stuff. It was a lot of fun. Yeah. And it was a good team. And we got to work with some really, really cool people as they rotated through various offices there.
That's really cool. So where do you go next?
So I go to the LDS Church to work for them.
Yeah. And how did that come to be? What helped you arrive there?
So South by Southwest used to be like this enormous tech conference.
Yeah.
Still kind of is, but I feel like it's sort of like faded a little bit.
Yeah.
It used to be like
in Austin, I think.
Yeah. It used to be like the gathering of all of the people who built the internet. And so I used to go like pretty regularly. We'd, all of us from NASA would go over to Austin for that week and spend a week there. And I got to know a couple of the people who built websites for the church and designed websites for the church. Yeah. Like we'd interacted on Twitter. I still can't call it X. It's always going to be Twitter for me. Twitter. Yeah. Way back, like there was a very active group there who were very active on Twitter. And so like we had lots of conversations there, met up in person at South by Southwest a couple of times. They took me out to dinner. They're like, hey, you should come work for us. And I was like, no.
What year is this?
Oh, this is like 2011.
Yeah. It's kind of like recruiting back then. I mean, it's been a while. Like recruiting was a little different back then.
Yeah, it was.
It wasn't as easy as just like throwing job online or something,
Right.
you know.
Yep.
You know, and there weren't as many programmers
There weren't.
at the time.
Yeah.
It was very, very technical.
It was. And at that time, like I was like shifting my focus into a lot of like front end technologies really heavily.
Yeah.
And so there weren't a lot of us running around who sort of specialized and got really deep on JavaScript and CSS at that point. So we had the whole dinner, come work for us thing. And I was like, no, like I'm working at NASA, I'm not leaving NASA right now. And about a year later, I had like my top 3 companies that I wanted to work for, right? Like I think everybody early in their career has like a list of companies that they're like, it'd be so cool to work there.
Yeah.
And it was like Google, Apple, LDS Church, right?
Interesting.
Be, you know,
and you grew up
aligned.
LDS.
I did, yeah.
Yeah.
And so when they were like, hey, you should come work for us, I was like, oh no, like I'm at a good place right now. Like I don't want to jump.
Yeah.
But about a year later, my marriage was falling apart.
Yeah.
And I was looking for change. I had figured out that I'd burned bridges early at NASA and that it was impacting my team. And
like, Daniel, will you please go to your next thing now?
Yeah. No, I had upset. I had like within my first couple of months, I had upset somebody fairly high up the IT chain.
Oh, really?
I didn't know who they were or like what their role was at that point.
Yeah.
I found out afterwards. And so like they had carried some resentment for a while. And when some other things happened, like that started to impact the team that I was working on.
Got it.
Negatively.
Yeah.
We had to play by a different set of rules than everybody else did.
Oh, that's a bummer.
Yeah, it was a bummer. But also like looking back on it, good learning lesson.
Yeah.
Also, not super surprising.
Yeah. And also like in the long run, it doesn't really matter, right? You know, in the long run, like, you know, your career moves forward, you move forward, you learn, you know, and I mean, you know, looking back, like maybe you found out what had happened and that you had upset somebody at your early job. Like you were probably very anxious about that, really frustrated. And then, you know, little did you know years forward, like where you could be in your own personal career. Totally. And that was just a blip.
Yeah, right? Exactly. So everything was sort of like shifting and I was looking for something new, had the opportunity to come work and interview at the church. And so I leapt at it because it was like top 3.
Yeah.
You got to go for when your top 3 call you, you have to go for your top 3.
Yeah.
So wound up coming up here, interviewing, feeling like it was, you know, if they offered me it, feeling like it was a thing that I was going to do and that I needed to do. And that's how I wound up in Utah.
And so you move here.
Moved here.
You get a divorce, right?
Yep.
She stay there. You come to Utah.
Yeah, she stayed in Texas.
Okay, and and no children.
Nope, no kids from that marriage.
Point. Okay, and so you start your job with like new geography.
Yeah.
New friendships. No roommates.
Yeah, no, like nothing, right? Like there's no one around. Like? It was kind of great because like I love riding bikes.
Yeah. And
so like I'd moved to one of the best places in the world to ride road bikes. Yeah. And so like it was just me. So I was, you know, feeding myself and like hopping on the bike and going for a ride and working, you know, dumb hours because what else did I have in my life?
Those are great engineers. You know,
yeah,
if you're
right?
hiring somebody, these guys just work. So
and so like it was a time of shift and transition in a big way. Like I was having to figure out who I was outside of a relationship, who I was on my own. That wasn't ever something that I was afraid of. I'd moved enough that like moving wasn't a big deal. And I'd built some friendships at work. And then like started building friendships outside of work as well. So mostly through bike racing, honestly.
Yeah. Through racing bikes. Yeah. So you, when you say racing, you're talking about like endurance.
Yeah.
Road biking.
Yeah. Yep.
That's cool. I've had some friends in the past that do that, or some that still do that. It's pretty intense.
Yeah.
They're long races, like 100+ miles.
Yeah, some of them are.
Yeah.
Most of my racing was a lot shorter than that. It's called criterium racing. So they're small closed road courses, but they're intense for different reasons. Because they're shorter, they tend to be like really, really spiky power, really, really fast, really, really lots of physical contact. I'm sporting some road rash.
Is that what that is? That
Tuesday night.
There we go.
Yeah,
that's
crazy. Up.
So you went down?
Yeah, happens.
Oh man,
it's part of racing.
It's part of it. It's part of it.
Yep.
All right, that's good. Hopefully that's the only road rash you got.
Yeah, there's more, but
there's more. We won't make you show that. But that's crazy.
Yeah, so like I started building some friendships through that, and that's those friendships led me to living in a place where I met my wife, Katie, and I continued to grow. Like I moved into like architectural roles, and then decided that it was time to move to an organization that moved more quickly.
So yeah, the church is like, I mean, for those that don't know, the LDS church has, I mean, the clergy or those giving service don't get paid, but there are employees of the church that do, administrative work, and in that there's applications and technology that's used every day in the church. And so they actually have a pretty large technical team.
Yeah, it's one of the largest in Utah. Yeah. And that like blows people's minds when I tell them that. But when you contextualize it, when you think about like, oh, this is an organization that has to deal with banks internationally for each congregation. It has to deal with, geographies and regulations that span essentially the globe.
Yep.
Name a country, and there are probably members there. They probably have data, which means that you have to apply to data residency requirements and all of that stuff. And you're dealing with like a very, very, very complex IT and software situation.
So how many years were you there?
So I was there about 4 years.
Yeah, it's good amount of time.
It was the right amount of time.
Yeah, it was the right amount of time. That's good. But overall, a good experience.
Yeah, it was a great experience.
Did you have any leadership experience there?
So I
individual contributor.
I was an individual contributor for all of it, sort of. So like I theoretically was a team lead, but our program manager ran the teams. And he like never assigned anyone to my team. It was like
so you're kind of doing your own thing.
I was like a team lead with no team.
Yeah.
But I left that group and then wound up in the core group. So we laid out architectural principles and tech stacks for the whole organization.
Awesome.
So that wasn't a direct leadership responsibility, but it was an informal technical leadership responsibility.
That's awesome.
Which was great. Like I got to advocate for things that I loved, got to build out culture. We built internal educational groups that got together on a biweekly basis and learned from each other. We did all sorts of fun stuff.
That's cool.
It was a really good opportunity to get really deep on architecture and work with some really, really smart people on that team.
That's awesome. And so where'd you go next?
Instructure.
Instructure.
Yeah.
So how was that going from the church and Instructure? This was like pre-IPO time.
It was,
right?
yeah. It was like 6 months to a year before IPO.
Yeah. Good timing.
Yeah, it was really good timing. And it was a huge shift. So I'd worked at NASA on a small team, but lots of bureaucracy. I'd worked at the church on a big team, and lots of bureaucracy. I'd worked at a college of education with like no bureaucracy because it was literally like 4 of us.
Yeah.
And now I was at Instructure, which was growing. So I had joined what became Bridge.
Yeah.
So I was one of like the first 20 or so software developers on Bridge.
Yeah.
So we were a very small group trying to build out an internal startup inside of Instructure. Yeah. Yeah. Which there are pros and cons to that approach. And I have lots of theories about it, but it was a really big learning experience. So I went from like a senior individual contributor there to realizing literally while I was driving home one night that like the piece that I was missing was leadership. Like I wanted that. I needed that as part of who I am.
Yeah.
In the background, while I was working at the church, I spun up a giant tech meetup back in like 2012, 2013 in Salt Lake. It's called Hack Night SLC. And we'd get it together like once a month. And it was kind of like a co-working situation where we'd get together one evening and people could work on whatever they wanted. And we'd have coding competitions and we'd have door prizes and all that stuff.
That's cool.
And so that was sort of filling the leadership hole.
Yeah.
And then as I moved into Instructure after having been there for a few years, I realized that I was missing that piece still. And so driving home realized, you know, the thing that you're missing is leadership, and sat down with, actually I didn't. I did what I shouldn't do. This is not what you should do. There was a leadership role open, a team lead role open on the other side of the business, so on the Canvas side of the business. And so I went and interviewed for it. Didn't tell my manager, didn't tell our VP of engineering, who like I knew pretty well because he was in the code with us all the time.
Yeah.
And went and interviewed with him, and they obviously like told them. So our VP of engineering sat down with me and was like, look, you're interviewing for this role. I was like, yeah, I want to do it. And he's like, okay, I don't have a spot open for you on our side, and I don't think you're ready. And here are the things you need to do to be ready. And that was another like great moment that had a lot of influence on me.
How did it make you feel? Did you feel encouraged by getting the right feedback, or did you feel frustrated?
I mean, I tell my wife this. I tell my team members this, and my team leads this. When you come at me with feedback, like come directly with it, I'm probably going to be defensive. But give me like a day to like let it sit and resonate, and like I will come around to the way that you're giving me feedback, I promise.
Yeah.
So if I get like, if you see me like physically stonewall, like don't worry, like it'll pass, like it's going to be okay. And that was, you know, like I could feel it like inside, right? Like it's always a gut punch when like you think you're ready for a thing and someone tells you that you're not. Luckily he gave me very clear, like, these are the things that you actually need to do. These are the places you're short. And he gave me the offer, right? Like next time we have a position open, if you're doing these things, like it'll be yours. And so I took that feedback on board after a day or two of like sitting on it and like made some changes in the way I was working. And when the opportunity opened up, I actually wound up working at the Pleasant Grove office because we had an office in Pleasant Grove for a period.
It's cool.
Helping run a team there that was behind on schedule, trying to rush out a new product. And that was my like first step into it. And then it kind of just kept going from there.
That's really cool. How do you feel now, you know, having been a leader and, you know, leading technical teams or product teams? Like, how do you feel now doing that?
I love it. I still love writing code. Like I love getting in the weeds, but I wouldn't be like, it wouldn't be complete for me without the leadership aspect anymore. Because I had plenty of bad leaders growing up in my career. I think all of us probably have had bad leaders at some point growing up in our career. And I learned from them what not to do. And so like being able to build people, being able to build cultures, being able to help teams deliver, like those things fill out the rest of the pieces for me.
Yeah.
Beyond just solving the problems of writing code or creating architectures, those pieces like complete the picture for me and help me be like feel fulfilled in what I'm doing.
So how do you think your life would look now if you had been a history professor?
It's a good question. Probably like less stressful.
Probably.
I'd probably have like more time with my kids in the summer than I do.
Yeah.
I'd probably be living on the East Coast and not in Utah. I don't think I ever would have wound up in Utah.
Yeah.
I don't think I would have met my wife or have the kids that I have now. So I don't know. It'd be a totally different thing.
Vastly different. It's crazy.
Yeah.
You know, fork in the road.
Yeah. So many of them along the way.
Yeah. You know, and all it took was a decision based, you know, triggered by a little bit of feedback from somebody who's honest with you.
Yep.
You know, it's really cool. What are your kids like? You have 2 children.
Yeah, I do.
Right? How old are they?
I have a son who's 4 and a daughter who's 8.
That's awesome.
And they are like very different and very similar all at the same time.
Do any of them show any engineering sort of aptitudes?
Like
you and your dad?
We'll see, right? I definitely we have a bunch of Arduinos floating around the house. We wire up switches and make LEDs change colors with the switches.
You've got enough influence. Just
yeah. No, and they love it, right? Like kids, cool. If you can sit down with a kid and make LEDs change to the color that they want them to, and like help them see how to do that, they love that.
Yeah.
So my daughter started getting into visual programming. There's some really cool visual programming tools out there for kids now.
Didn't know that.
Where you just drag logical operators around, visual representations of them around.
That's cool.
So she started playing with some of that stuff.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Is that your 8-year-old?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. That's really cool. It'd be interesting to see how the next generation sort of goes and what they end up doing. It always fascinates me thinking about what my kids might do at some point. So if you were to give some advice to, somebody maybe in a similar situation that you were one day as, somebody starting early in their career, maybe it's programming, maybe it's something else, maybe it's history.
Sure.
What advice would you give them?
That's a good question. I think just because you are learning about something or studying something or fascinated by something like that, it doesn't always have to be that thing that is the thing that you're going to do, right? So I studied history, and part of that was I loved writing and I loved research. And guess what creating software is? Creating software is writing and it's research.
Yep.
Creating, books is writing and it's research. Figure out what it is underneath that draws you to that thing, or that you think is drawing you to that thing. And remember that can go a lot of different places. And just be open to going different places, but also don't give up on the things that you love. I don't write histories. I never will. But I read history textbooks because there are lessons in history that I can apply to my teams and to the companies that I'm working with and to the businesses that they're building. And so it's okay to let go of a thing partially and hold on to pieces of it and keep letting them simmer for you. It's all.
That's awesome. That's really awesome. Thank you for taking the time to come on the show today. If anyone has a question for you, is there somewhere they can reach you?
Sure. Yeah. Probably the easiest place to reach me is on Twitter, the website formerly known as Twitter. I'm Daniel_Sellers. And if you shoot me a message, I'll totally respond.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for listening to today's episode of No Instructions. Feel free to leave us a rating or review wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe so we can continue producing these podcasts. Today's episode was brought to you by Distro. Distro is a platform to help startups find, hire, and pay employees in over 200 countries. It's free to use. Go to distro.io to set up your free account today.